It's strange how something so innocent can change your life forever. I never imagined that a casual moment could pull me into a whirlwind of emotions I wasn't prepared to face. But sometimes the lines between what's right and wrong blur before you even realize you're crossing them. I still remember that summer vividly. My name is Rachel, and at the time, I had just returned home after graduating from college. My parents' house felt the same, like a time capsule holding all the memories of my simpler days. My dad, Michael, was as welcoming as always, with his calm demeanor and warm smile. But there was something different this time, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It all started with a casual conversation during dinner. We were laughing about old stories, sharing the kind of moments that remind you how much family means. Yet, as the evening went on, I started noticing little things about him that I hadn't before. The way his voice lingered when he said my name, the way his gaze seemed to hold mine a second too long. It made my heart race, and I didn't know why. I shook it off, blaming my overactive imagination. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying those moments, wondering if I was reading too much into them. After all, he was my father. There was no reason to feel so unsettled. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the strange new awareness I had of him. The next day, things felt even more confusing. It was a scorching afternoon, and I decided to spend some time by the pool. I was lying there, soaking up the sun, when I noticed him watching me from the kitchen window. His eyes lingered, and when our gazes met, he didn't look away. A small smile played on his lips before he disappeared back inside. I tried to brush it off, but the air between us felt heavier that evening. When I walked into the living room, he was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. I hesitated, wondering if I should sit next to him. My heart thudded in my chest as I decided to join him, telling myself it was harmless. We started talking about life, about my plans for the future. But as the conversation deepened, so did the intensity in his eyes. When his hand brushed against mine on the couch, I froze. It was just a touch, but it sent shivers down my spine. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. I nodded, forcing a smile, but I knew something had shifted. The way his hand lingered near mine, the way his voice dropped when he spoke, it felt forbidden, yet I couldn't pull away. I didn't know how to feel, but deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of something I wasn't ready to face. The days that followed felt like walking on a tightrope, balancing between curiosity and guilt. I avoided being alone with him as much as I could, but there were moments I couldn't escape. Moments that left me questioning everything. One evening, the power went out during a storm. The house was plunged into darkness except for the faint glow of candles scattered around. I was curled up on the couch with a blanket, trying to distract myself with a book, when he walked into the room. "You okay?" he asked, his voice soft and warm, carrying over the sound of the rain. "Yeah, just trying to pass the time," I replied, keeping my eyes on the book, though the words blurred as my heart raced. He sat down beside me, closer than usual. The couch dipped slightly under his weight, and I felt his warmth even through the blanket. I shifted slightly, trying to put some space between us, but he didn't move. Instead, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "You've grown up so much," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Sometimes it's hard to believe. The intensity in his gaze made my stomach twist. I looked away, my cheeks burning, unsure of what to say. "You've always been so beautiful," he added, his hand lingering near my face. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't untangle. Flattery, confusion, and an undeniable tension I didn't want to admit was there. "Dad, I started, but the words caught in my throat." He pulled his hand back, his expression softening. "Sorry," he murmured. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "It's fine," I replied quickly, though my heart was pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the rain tapping against the windows. I tried to focus on the sound, on anything that would distract me from the weight of his presence beside me. But when his hand brushed against mine again, I didn't pull away. That moment felt like the edge of a cliff. I didn't know whether to step back or let myself fall. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind was racing, replaying every word, every glance, every touch. I knew I was walking a dangerous path, but the pull I felt was undeniable. I told myself it was just a fleeting moment of confusion, something I could forget if I tried hard enough. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The next day, I tried to act normal, keeping my distance and avoiding prolonged eye contact. I thought maybe if I didn't acknowledge it, the tension would dissolve. But later that afternoon, everything came to a head. It was a hot day, the kind that makes you crave the coolness of water. I decided to take a swim in the backyard pool, hoping it would clear my mind. As I floated on the surface, the sun warm on my skin, I heard the sliding door open. I turned to see him standing there, watching me. "You look like you're enjoying yourself," he said, stepping closer. "It's refreshing," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. He sat on the edge of the pool, dipping his feet into the water. For a moment, it felt like nothing was out of the ordinary. But then, as I swam closer, his gaze lingered in a way that made my heart race. "Come sit with me," he said, patting the edge beside him. I hesitated but eventually swam over, pulling myself out of the water and sitting next to him. Droplets of water ran down my skin, and I noticed the way his eyes followed them. The air between us felt heavy, thick with unspoken tension. "You've grown into such an incredible woman," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "Thanks," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He reached out, brushing a drop of water off my shoulder. His touch was soft, lingering longer than it should have. I shivered, though the air was warm. "Do you ever think about how close we've always been?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Dad," I started, my heart pounding. "We can't." "I know," he said quickly, his hand dropping away. I don't know how to stop feeling this way." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible to ignore. I felt my chest tighten, torn between the bond we shared and the boundary we were teetering on. I stood abruptly, wrapping a towel around myself. "I need to go inside," I said, avoiding his gaze. As I walked away, I felt his eyes on me, and I knew this wasn't over. Something had been set into motion, and there was no going back. The days after that moment by the pool were heavy with silence. I tried to avoid him, staying in my room or leaving the house whenever I could. But no matter how far I distanced myself, the tension between us seemed to follow, lingering in the quiet spaces of our home. One evening, I was sitting in the living room, lost in thought, when he walked in. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, and I could feel his eyes on me even as I pretended to scroll through my phone. Finally, he broke the silence. "Rachel, we need to talk," he said, his voice quiet but firm. I hesitated, my heart racing. "About what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "About us," he said, sitting down across from me. "About what's been happening." "There's nothing to talk about," I said quickly, looking away. "It's all just a misunderstanding." "No," he said, his tone resolute. "It's not. I can't keep pretending that everything is normal when it's not." I felt my chest tighten as I glanced at him. His eyes were filled with a mix of pain and longing, and I knew this conversation was inevitable. "Dad, this is wrong," I said, my voice trembling. "Whatever you're feeling, it has to stop." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "But I don't know how. Every time I look at you, I see more than I should. And I hate myself for it." His words hit me like a wave, and I felt tears sting my eyes. "You can't say things like that," I whispered. "You're my father." "I'm sorry," he said, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I don't want to feel this way, Rachel. But I can't ignore it anymore." I stood up abruptly, wrapping my arms around myself, as if to shield against the emotions swirling inside me. "We need boundaries," I said, my voice shaking. Whatever this is, it has to end." He nodded, his face etched with regret. "You're right. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." For a moment, we just stood there, the weight of our emotions pressing down on us. I wanted to believe him, to trust that we could move past this. But the unspoken feelings between us had already changed everything. "I'm going to bed," I said finally, turning toward the stairs. "Good night." "Good night," he replied, his voice barely audible. As I climbed the stairs, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. I hoped this conversation would put an end to the turmoil, but deep down, I wasn't sure if it was enough. Something had been broken between us, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. That night, sleep evaded me. My mind raced with memories of his words, his expression, and the heaviness that had settled between us. I knew I needed to put an end to this tension before it consumed us both. But the question was, how? The next morning, I tried to avoid him, hoping the day would pass without confrontation. But when I walked into the kitchen for breakfast, he was there, leaning against the counter. His eyes met mine, and I could tell he hadn't slept either. "Rachel," he said, his voice steady but soft. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, gripping the edge of the kitchen table. "What else is there to say?" "A lot," he replied, stepping closer. "I need you to understand that I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you or confuse you." "You already have," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, the guilt clear in his eyes. I know, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I need to know that you'll forgive me for feeling this way. I stared at him, my emotions a storm I couldn't control. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to move past this and pretend it never happened. But another part of me couldn't shake the tension that lingered between us, the way his words and actions had blurred a line that should never have been crossed. Forgiveness doesn't fix this, I said finally, my voice trembling. We need space. Time. Something to make this go away. He looked at me, his face a mixture of pain and understanding. If that's what you need, I'll give it to you. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I think it's best if I leave for a while. His eyes widened slightly, but he didn't argue. If that's what you want, he said quietly. I just want you to be okay. I'll be okay, I said, though I wasn't sure if it was true. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I packed my things, trying not to think about the weight of what I was leaving behind. When I was ready to go, he was waiting by the door, his hands shoved into his pockets. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, regret, sadness, maybe even relief. I'm sorry, he said again, his voice breaking. Me too, I replied, avoiding his gaze. As I stepped out the door and into the sunlight, I felt a strange mix of emotions, freedom, sadness, and an aching sense of loss. Driving away, I told myself this was the right decision, the only way to move forward. But deep down, I knew the memories of what happened would linger, shaping me in ways I couldn't yet understand. Weeks passed after I left home. The distance brought a strange sense of relief, but it didn't erase the memories or the emotions that had unraveled between us. I stayed with a close friend, throwing myself into work and trying to rebuild a sense of normalcy. But late at night, when the world was quiet, the weight of what had happened would creep back in. I didn't speak to him during those weeks. I wasn't ready. I needed time to untangle my emotions and make sense of the blurred lines that had thrown my life into chaos. But one day a letter arrived. His handwriting on the envelope stopped me in my tracks. I debated whether to open it, but curiosity and unresolved feelings got the better of me. Inside was a single sheet of paper, his words written with care. Rachel, I know I don't deserve to ask for your forgiveness, but I hope one day you can find it in your heart to understand how much I regret everything. The emotions I felt were confusing and wrong, and I hate that they put a strain on our relationship. You are my daughter, and I love you. Not in the way that caused all this pain, but in the way a father should love his child. I let my weakness and confusion blur that, and for that, I am truly sorry. You made the right decision to leave, to find the space and peace we both needed. I've been trying to work through my feelings, to understand how and why I let things get this far. All I want is for you to be happy and safe, even if that means staying away from me for a while. I hope someday, when you're ready, we can rebuild what was lost. Until then, please know that I will always love and support you. Dad. Reading his words, I felt a mixture of emotions, relief, sadness, and a glimmer of hope. He was acknowledging his mistakes, taking responsibility for the pain he had caused. It didn't erase what happened, but it was a start. I didn't reply immediately. I needed more time, but the letter stayed with me, a reminder that healing was possible, even after the deepest wounds. Final reflection. As more time passed, I began to see the situation for what it was, a moment of weakness, a crossing of lines that should have never been blurred. But I also realized that healing wasn't just about forgetting, it was about confronting the pain, learning from it, and finding a way forward. Eventually, I reached out to him. Our conversations were cautious at first, filled with unspoken emotions and tentative steps toward rebuilding trust. It wasn't easy, but over time, we started to find a new balance, a way to connect without letting the past overshadow everything. Looking back, I know this experience changed me. It taught me the importance of boundaries, of recognizing when something isn't right and having the strength to walk away. It also reminded me that people are flawed, but those flaws don't define them if they're willing to grow. Our relationship will never be the same, but maybe that's okay. We're moving forward one step at a time, and sometimes that's the best you can do. Over the next year, we began to rebuild what had been broken piece by piece. The conversations we had were not easy. They were filled with pauses, awkward silences, and sometimes tears. But each step felt like progress, no matter how small. He told me about the therapy he had started, how he was learning to confront the emotions that had blurred the lines between us. He spoke of his regret, not just for how things unfolded, but for how it hurt both of us. For the first time, I felt like he was truly owning his part in what happened. I, too, had to work through my feelings. I learned to let go of the guilt I had carried, reminding myself that I wasn't responsible for his emotions or actions. Slowly, I began to see the experience not as something that defined me, but as something that taught me about boundaries, self-respect, and the importance of walking away when something feels wrong. A new chapter. Eventually, we decided to meet in person. It was at a quiet cafe, a neutral space where we could talk without the weight of our shared history pressing down on us. Seeing him again was strange. It brought back memories, both good and bad, but it also felt like a chance to start over. "I've missed you," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've missed you too," I admitted. "But we can't go back to how things were." He nodded, a sad but understanding smile on his face. "I know. I just hope we can find a new way forward." That meeting was the beginning of a cautious but hopeful reconciliation. We agreed to take things slow, to focus on rebuilding trust and maintaining healthy boundaries. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Moving forward, as time passed, I found myself thinking less about the past and more about the future. The relationship we were rebuilding was different, less dependent, more respectful. It wasn't without its challenges, but it felt grounded in a mutual understanding of what we had learned from our mistakes. For me, moving forward also meant focusing on my own life. I poured my energy into my career, my friendships, and my passions. I realized that healing wasn't just about fixing the relationship with him. It was about finding peace within myself. A closing thought. Looking back, I know we'll never have the relationship we once did. But maybe that's okay. What we've built now is based on honesty, boundaries, and a shared commitment to growth. It's not perfect, but it's real. The scars of the past will always be there, a reminder of what we went through. But they don't define us. They're just part of the story, one that continues to unfold with every step we take toward healing and understanding. Years have passed since that summer, and the memory of those difficult times feels more like a distant echo than an open wound. Life has moved on, carrying me forward in ways I never thought possible back then. I've built a life for myself, a career I love, friendships that ground me, and a sense of peace I fought hard to achieve. Our relationship, though once strained and fragile, has settled into something stable. We've established boundaries, ones that have given both of us the space to grow individually. He has remained committed to his journey of self-reflection and improvement, and I've worked to build my confidence, to trust myself and others again. The power of distance. The distance we once imposed has turned into a gift. It allowed us to redefine what family means and to rebuild our bond in a way that feels healthy and respectful. We no longer try to hold on to the past, but instead focus on what the present can offer. It's not perfect. There are still moments when the weight of our history creeps in, but we handle them better now. Time has given us the tools to cope, finding strength. Through this journey, I've learned that resilience isn't about ignoring the pain or pretending it didn't happen. It's about facing it head-on, accepting it, and allowing it to shape you into someone stronger and wiser. The experience taught me that even in our darkest moments, there's an opportunity for growth. I've also learned to forgive, not just him, but myself. For a long time, I carried guilt, wondering if I could have prevented what happened. But I've come to understand that responsibility doesn't always lie where we think it does. Forgiving myself was one of the hardest parts, but it was also the most liberating. Looking ahead, today, our relationship exists in a quiet balance. We see each other during family gatherings and holidays, sharing laughter and memories without the unspoken tension that once hung over us. It's not the relationship we used to have, but it's one we've built together, brick by brick. More importantly, I've found peace within myself. The past no longer defines me. It's simply a chapter in my story, one that I've closed but still respect for the lessons it taught me. I've learned to cherish the relationships in my life that are built on trust, love, and mutual respect. A final note. To anyone reading this who might be struggling with blurred lines or difficult emotions, know that you are not alone. Healing takes time, and it's okay to set boundaries to protect yourself. Growth comes from facing the truth, no matter how painful it might be, and choosing to move forward one step at a time. The road to healing is never easy, but it's always worth it. And while the scars may remain, they serve as a reminder of the strength it takes to rebuild, to forgive, and to choose a better future. Years later, life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined during that summer. I had a career I loved, a supportive circle of friends, and a sense of self-worth that had taken years to rebuild. The pain from the past no longer felt sharp, It had dulled into a memory that occasionally resurfaced, but no longer controlled me. My father and I had settled into a distant, but respectful relationship. We spoke during holidays, exchanged occasional messages, and shared updates on our lives. While the closeness we once had was gone, what remained was something I had grown to appreciate: an honest acknowledgement of the past and a commitment to move forward. Sharing my story. One day, while attending a community event focused on mental health and personal growth, I found myself drawn to a session on resilience. The speaker encouraged attendees to share their experiences of overcoming difficult times. For the first time, I felt ready to talk about my story, not the details, but the lessons it had taught me. When it was my turn to speak, my voice trembled, but I found strength in the room's supportive energy. I went through something that shattered my sense of self and my trust in the relationships I thought were unbreakable. I began. But through time, distance, and a lot of reflection, I learned that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to live with it and letting it shape you into someone stronger. As I shared, I noticed nods of understanding in the audience. My words resonated with others who had faced their own struggles, and for the first time, I felt that my story had purpose beyond my own healing. A new chapter. That day marked the beginning of something new. I started volunteering at similar events, connecting with people who felt trapped by their own experiences. Sharing my journey didn't just help others. It reminded me of how far I had come. My father and I spoke about this part of my life during one of our rare but meaningful conversations. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You've turned something painful into something that helps others. That takes strength." "Thank you," I replied, my voice steady. "It's taken time, but I've learned that the past doesn't define us unless we let it." There was a silence on the line before he said, "I hope one day I can say the same for myself." "You already have," I said gently. Taking responsibility and working on yourself is a step most people don't take. That's something to be proud of. Closing the book. While the story of that summer will always be a part of my life, it no longer feels like the central chapter. It's a part of a larger narrative, one filled with growth, resilience, and hope. I've learned that even the darkest moments can lead to light if we're willing to face them and work through the pain. As I look ahead, I carry the lessons of that time with me. The importance of boundaries, the power of self-forgiveness, and the belief that even the most broken relationships can find a way to heal in their own imperfect way. Life isn't about avoiding scars. It's about wearing them as proof that we've survived, grown, and found our way forward. Years later, as I stood on the steps of the house where it all began, I felt an odd mix of emotions. I hadn't been back in so long, but something inside me urged me to return, not to relive the past, but to finally let it go. The house had been sold years ago. The new owners had repainted the walls, redone the garden, and replaced the old wooden door with a sleek modern one. It looked different, yet familiar, like a distant memory brought back to life. I didn't come to knock on the door or walk through its halls. Instead, I stood outside, letting the memories resurface. The laughter, the arguments, the moments of tension and confusion, it all came back, but it didn't hurt the way it used to. I had healed enough to see those memories as just that, memories. They no longer defined who I was. As I turned to leave, I spotted something that stopped me in my tracks, the old swing set in the backyard. It was rusted now, the paint chipped and the seat worn, but it was still standing. I remembered the hours I had spent there as a child, swinging higher and higher, believing I could touch the sky. I walked over and sat on the swing, gripping the chains. For a moment, I let myself go back to those simpler times, the times before everything changed. And then, with a deep breath, I pushed off. The swing creaked as I moved back and forth, the breeze brushing against my face. I closed my eyes, imagining myself letting go of the weight I had carried for so long. With each swing, I felt lighter, freer. A new beginning. As I left the house for the last time, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer felt heavy. They were a part of me, yes, but they didn't define me. Back in my own life, I continued to build something meaningful. I grew in my career, formed deeper relationships, and found peace in small, everyday moments. I even began writing, using my experiences to craft stories that resonated with others. Stories about growth, resilience, and finding light in the darkness. An unexpected message. Months after my visit to the old house, I received a message from my father. It wasn't long, just a simple acknowledgement. "I heard you went back to the house. I hope it gave you peace. I think about you often and hope you're doing well." I stared at the message for a while before replying. It did. And I'm doing okay. I hope you are too. There was no need for more. Sometimes the simplest exchanges hold the deepest meanings. Looking forward, that moment marked the true end of that chapter in my life. I wasn't bound by the past anymore. I wasn't defined by what happened. I was free to move forward, to embrace the future with hope and strength. The scars would always be there, but they were proof of my resilience, my ability to overcome. And as I looked ahead, I knew that I had the power to write the next chapters of my life, filled with love, growth, and endless possibilities.